mainstream newspapers and TV channels. The Middle East Media Research Institute, abbreviated to MEMRI, translates media from the Muslim world into English. Describing itself as non-partisan, MEMRI says it exposes anti-Semitism, monitors terrorist groups and gives a platform to Arab reformers. But is this a case of selective memory? Here's a look of what they do.
جاء عيسى عليه الصلاة والسلام يقول لهم اتركوا أموالكم واتبعوا لي. ما ينفعش. هذا الموضوع مش نافع.
انتم متصورين انتم يا الشباب المايع التافه هذا، متصورين انكم بهذه الطريقه تتحضرون؟ يعني انه انتم تصيرون نفس الشباب الغربي التالف اللي يتأنث ويتخنث؟ من واجبنا، من واجب المجتمع المؤمن القضاء على هذه الظاهرة، ولكن بأي شيء؟ بالوسائل المشروعة.
Critics say the Institute cherry-picks stories in the media that portray Muslims as hateful and ignorant. Its assertion of being independent and unbiased has also been questioned. MEMRI was founded by a former Israeli military intelligence officer, and its board features former Israeli ministers. Well, to discuss this, I'm joined now from Berkeley, California, by Hatem Bazian. He's a professor of Islamic law and theology at Zaytuna College. And in London, we have Middle East media analyst Tom Gross. Gentlemen, thanks for joining us. Tom Gross, is MEMRI a propaganda outfit, or does it provide a valuable service?
No, I think it's very unfair to call it a propaganda outfit. Look, it adds to the mix. It's obviously filling in the gaps that it feels are not being covered elsewhere. Many media journalists in the West, they don't speak Arabic, they don't have the resources to examine media. But although MEMRI also does highlight although MEMRI does highlight aspects of conspiracy theories, including anti-Semitism, it also highlights a lot of calls for reform in the wider Middle East and Arab reformers and liberals. So it's not only highlighting negative stuff, it's also highlighting positive elements of Arab media.
Hatem, are you convinced?
Not by the least. I think MEMRI has to be understood as being part of an Israeli front, part of the Hasbara network. This is to explain, to inform. It bills itself as bridging the language gap between the Middle East and the West. And I actually say it builds the bridge to the Islamophobic horizon in the West and continues to stoke Islamophobic imagery in the American and Western civil society. It cherry picks the information. It actually, its translation, while sometimes accurate, it actually tries to fill the gaps to try to constantly present the Muslims and the Arab world as being anything but part of the world. It is a strategy to maintain the American public and the United States government solidly and conditionally supportive of Israel, and therefore it has to be understood that MEMRI is a propaganda front for Israeli political speak, and nothing more, nothing less.
Hatem, is there a deeper, more uncomfortable reality here that, yes, even though they might be cherry-picking, yes, even though they might have an agenda, there is just a plethora of this stuff available from which they can choose sectarianism from, I don't know, Iraqi Shia channels or Iranian channels saying stuff about Sunnis, sectarianism from Sunnis saying terrible stuff about Shias, anti-Semitic stuff. It's all there, and it's making MEMRI's job very easy for them.
Well, one can say there's definitely lots of material in there, but one has to step back and not to think of MEMRI and its board of directors and those individuals that are involved in it are somewhat disconnected from what is occurring in the Arab and Muslim world. One cannot speak of Iraq without actually thinking of that pre the invasion of Iraq, which many of those who are on MEMRI's board, including Bolton, Wormser, and others, were pushing for the Iraq war. And then after that, they say, you see, the Sunnis and Shias hate each other.
Okay, that's an interesting point. Certainly, I want to pose that to Tom Gross, right? So when we look at MEMRI's own board of directors, or the board of advisors, rather, it includes John Bolton, James Woolsey. I've had some conversations with the former CIA director, Woolsey, who's very keen on war with Iran. John Ashcroft, the former Attorney General, Donald Rumsfeld, we all know Rumsfeld's record, Alan Dershowitz, Ehud Barak, and so on. It was founded also by someone who served as an advisor to two Israeli prime ministers. With that in mind, they have an agenda. Would you accept that, Tom?
Well, first of all, I'd just like to point out, I checked just before this interview, a lot of the staff of MEMRI are not Israeli or American. The staff of MEMRI include Palestinians, Saudi Arabians, Sudanese, Indian Muslims in New Delhi, covering Pakistan with Urdu and so on. Also, MEMRI is actually technically an American organization. It's not an Israeli organization. But I think the point is that we shouldn't be discussing MEMRI. We should be discussing the anti-Semitism and other conspiracy stuff that unfortunately is prevalent in a lot of Middle East media, which is a problem mainly for those own societies. I mean, I'm sure we all agree that we'd like to see a more liberal, better Middle East, and it's not helpful with this kind of conspiratorial broadcast.
But Tom, are we seeing MEMRI offering us up some Jerry Springer show variety of options here? That's not all we've got in the Middle East, but MEMRI is giving us a very skewed version of reality there.
I don't think so. I did a search under this on their website, and there's something called the MEMRI, the Middle East Reformists Project. There are dozens and dozens of clips they've highlighted, which are very good, which show all kinds of reformists' voices, whether it's freedom of speech, whether it's rights for women, minorities, homosexuals, against domestic violence, and so on. Of course, I'm not suggesting there are not these kinds of problems in the West and all around the world too. It's not just in the Middle East, for sure. But certainly a lot of Arab and wider Middle Eastern reformers welcome the work of MEMRI. So of course they're not trying to cover everything. They are what I would call filling in the gaps. There are plenty of other media out there and other academic and media sources for people to get information from. But I would say that MEMRI do play an important role. And as we witnessed recently with the Holocaust distortion piece on Al Jazeera themselves then disciplined the two journalists involved and apologized. So Al Jazeera, in effect, thanked MEMRI for pointing out something that they didn't think was good.
Although MEMRI did the translation afterwards, I think it was initially translated by somebody else, right? But let me take that point, Hatem. So with AJ Plus, they had one message in English and one message in Arabic, and people put these together and showed a discrepancy and said, hey, there's anti-Semitism in this AJ Plus Arabic video, and it enacted change. Tom's point is that exposing this stuff leads to change. Would you disagree with that?
I'm not in disagreement that some cases that change has to take place and people need to take responsibility. But to assume at the core that MEMRI is neutral and it's researching for the best interest of the Arab and Muslim world, it's a smack of insult, almost compounded insult on this case. Had they been neutral, I would ask them, where is the reform messages for the Palestinians and those that are rotting in Israeli jails? Where are the critique of Netanyahu, who hugs almost every other neo-fascist that are taking place in Europe? Where is their critique of the French Marine Le Pen? Where is their critique of the rising tide of right wing? To assume that they're sitting in there and just being neutrally trying to assess anti-Semitism, I would say that has to be challenged. MEMRI basically is a propaganda machine that stokes and promotes Islamophobic discourse by trying to highlight and constantly present the Muslims as an individual that does not belong to civilization, that does not have the capacity for liberalism. And I think that's what MEMRI has to be critiqued and take responsibility.
Okay, and I'm going to get Tom to respond to that in a second, but let me give you one example, Hatem. Going through MEMRI's archives, seeing Saudi reformist voices speaking out against the kingdom. Would you have any problem with that? I saw that on MEMRI, people talking about the situation in Saudi Arabia, and these are reformist Saudi voices. They're not there to make Arabs or Muslims look bad.
Oh, that's a great question. I would ask MEMRI possibly to check with John Bolton and his relationship with Saudi Arabia, rather than actually beat up the Muslims and say, you see, you are uncivilized and unable to support your human rights activists.
But they're not necessarily making that argument, right? They're putting the clip up there, and you can decide if these people are uncivilized or not, right? Yeah.
But again, this is a responsibility of actually who is responsible. If you want to paint in a broad brush to say that the Muslim world is full of anti-Semitism, in essence to say that is the reason for opposition to Israel, then MEMRI is your go-to site.
Tom Gross, I think Hatem would be happier if MEMRI also featured some crazy kahanists who say terrible things about Palestinians, which is obviously out there, but you have to work harder to find it because MEMRI doesn't show it.
Well, first of all, I just want to correct a few things. I've only ever met once someone connected to MEMRI at a conference in Washington 2 years ago. And at the time, he was the vice president. And he is born in Cuba, came to America when he's one. He's the former American ambassador to Sudan, a fluent Arab speaker. He is not somebody, he has nothing to do with Israel. He's a practicing Roman Catholic. So first of all, it's wrong to suggest this is some kind of neocon John Bolton type front. Okay, that's the first thing. Second thing is, I don't think it pretends to be neutral, to use your word. In fact, I don't know any media that's entirely neutral. It is not neutral between, let's say, Islamists and reformers in the Arab world. It's not trying to be. Okay, it's filling a gap which it feels is not being filled in certain other parts of the media. So it's not pretending to cover everything. Vis-a-vis Israel, thankfully in Israel, as far as I'm aware, there's a very robust media. You have papers like the most serious intellectual paper of Israel, Haaretz, which has a lot of articles very critical of their own army and their own government and so on in Haaretz and elsewhere. So it's not that they're not, there's plenty of places one can find criticism of Israel, whether warranted or exaggerated or not warranted. So I don't think MEMRI is trying to be the entire world media and, let's say, criticize Le Pen that you mentioned in France and so on. As far as I'm aware, although I've never met him, the founder of MEMRI, who is Israeli, worked for Yitzhak Rabin, who, as you know, was the assassinated former prime minister on the center-left Labour Party. So he's not, as far as I'm aware, some kind of hardline right-wing Israeli. And I think that MEMRI is filling a gap. And I think the real question is, why don't we talk about this segment, instead of talking about the messenger, MEMRI, why aren't we talking about why there isn't a freer media in Arab countries and so on? It would be, I think,
but we do
certainly
on this program we do, and we've had that conversation, and we'll continue to have that conversation. This was a good bit of insight into MEMRI because people talk about it, and we decided to shed a light on it. We invited MEMRI onto the program. They didn't get back to us, unfortunately. Maybe we'll talk to them a little bit later on down the line. But gentlemen, I've got to move on. I really thank you both for joining us, Tom Gross and Hatem Bazian. Thanks for joining us.